Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari 8-bit games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is one of the former, and it hails from Analog magazine, which was one of the two big Atari 8-bit publications in the United States, alongside Antic magazine, which we've already come across a couple of times. So Analog originally stood for Atari Newsletter and Lots of Games, an acronym which the editor admitted wasn't the best in the first issue, but it kind of stuck, and Analog was quite a catchy name anyway. And Analog was noteworthy for a few reasons. One, it was simply a high quality publication that lasted for quite a long time. And two, that Lots of Games part was a particularly important part of its identity, so it became very well known over the years for being a source of high quality public domain software that you could type in from the magazine. So we've already talked a little bit about type-in listings beforehand. But Analog was very noteworthy for the number of high quality machine code programs that it included in there. So an Analog's machine code loader routine, where you could type in a basic program and it would then generate an executable file for either floppy disk or cassette based systems. That came across the pond into other magazines as well. It came into Page 6 magazine, often used that same routine for its machine code programs that it published as well. So yeah, Analog was a very influential part of the Atari 8-bit scene, and it's very easy to focus almost exclusively on the commercial side of things of computing history, but Analog, Antic, Page 6, Atari User, all these publications were a key part of computing culture at the time, so it's really important to have a look at this side of things as well as the commercial software that might be a bit more well known. So the game we're going to be looking at today was originally published in issue 20 of Analog, which was the July 1984 issue. And the game is called Bacterion. It was developed by a pair of programmers called Kyle Peacock and Tom Hudson. Kyle Peacock was the main programmer, and then he specifically credited Tom Hudson for some of the graphical routines that he used throughout the game. And the pair had collaborated on a couple of other projects over the course of Analog's lifetime as well, including Bopatron and Firebug, which I'm sure we'll come across at some point in this series. So, Bacterion is a pretty interesting game. It's one that I remember enjoying quite a lot back in the day, and it's actually set up as a sort of quasi follow-up to Robotron almost. If you read the original source in the magazine, it sort of makes direct reference to the Robotron incident of 2084, and then 200 years later, the events of Bacterion happens. So, the basic concept of Bacterion is that humanity has perfected synthetic humans, which it calls syntrons. And there are actually several games in Analog's lifetime that incorporated the concept of syntrons in various ways. There's a whole game called just Syntron. I don't believe it's directly related to Bacterion, but it's sort of a running theme, I think. So the story runs that in the year 2369, a genetically invulnerable bacteria was discovered. And this has been affecting the Syntron's cerebral cells. And man is next on the menu. So this bacteria can mutate and transfer from these synthetic humans into actual humans. And so, as a member of the Biological Armament Restriction Force, or BARF, you must pilot your genetic extermination vehicle through the brains of the UK's Prime Minister, the President of the USSR, because it was 1984 and the USSR was still a thing, and they apparently thought it still would be a thing in 2369, and the President of the US. And your aim is to stave off the infection for as long as possible, as these various strains of bacteria trying to steal the cerebral cells out of these three important political figures, who are all, by 2369, syntrons, I hasten to add. So, I don't know, you can probably make some sort of clever, pithy political joke there, but I'm not going to. I just want to go and play Bacterion. So, let's go play Bacterion. Okay, here we are with Bacterion, The Plague of 2369 by Kyle Peacock with Tom Hudson for Analog Computing. Now, I forget the original context in which I came across this game, because I don't think I typed it in myself. I think it might have been one of those games that we had on one of the numerous sort of multi-boot discs that we had on the Atari 8-bit, because those tended to contain a mix of both pirated commercial software and stuff that had come from magazines as well, public domain stuff. But I definitely played this back in the day. Sorry, I forget the original context though. So, before we start, you can hit the select button to switch between 1 and 2 player modes, and this is actually a simultaneous 2 player game, which is pretty neat. And it's cooperative as well. That's why you have the team score down at the bottom. So you can track your individual scores, and it also tracks your total score as well. And then by pressing the Option key, I don't know how well you can see that on the video, but if you look at how quickly the colours are cycling around the Bacterion logo at the top. So there's the fastest, there's the middle speed, and there's the slowest. Each of those corresponds to... I don't know if they're difficulty levels, but they're certainly different setups for the game. So, thematically, each of those is one of the 3 different world leaders that you're supposed to be saving the world, or saving the brain of, or whatever. So, I believe it's the Prime Minister of the UK for that, the President of the USSR for that one, and the President of the United States for that one. It doesn't really matter all that much. Let's try and save the President of the United States. So we hit start and off we go. So in the middle there, those are the cerebral cells that we're trying to save. Incoming are the bacteria, and we are the little ship that is shooting stuff. So you control this game a bit like Asteroids. Oh, what's going on? Something strange has happened. How very odd. I'll be right back. Okay, let's try that again, shall we? Right. As I was saying, you control your ship there, and you get shot by bacteria, and your aim is to stop them from nicking all those brain cells from the middle. So you control the game a bit like Asteroids, so you turn and you thrust. There's not anywhere near as much momentum as there is in Asteroids, so this is a lot easier to control if you normally struggle with this sort of game like I usually do. You've actually got infinite lives as well, I believe. And so the only way you can lose is for all of those cells in the middle to be taken away. So it starts pretty straightforward. So there's just 3 of these cells come in at a time, but they gradually get faster and faster and more aggressive as you play through the game. You can see they're already starting to speed up a bit. So the game operates in waves like this. So you blast your way through a wave like this, then you get a brief intermission screen like this, and then you move on to it's crashed again. Going well today, isn't it? I'll be right back. Honestly, I've not had a single problem with this game up until now, and then as soon as I want to record it, everything breaks. But yeah, that's basically how the game as a whole operates. You blast your way through these hordes of enemies. Well, conveniently come 3 at a time. You try not to die. You try not to let them take away the President's brain cells. And that's that, really. But like I say, I believe it's important to acknowledge games like this because they were such an important part of home computer culture at the time. So a lot of these magazines that were around in the 8-bit era in particular, they position themselves as not just a games magazine like we have for modern platforms, but they were magazines that were designed to help you get the most out of your computer. And I didn't read a lot of Commodore 64 and Spectrum magazines, so I don't know if it was exactly the same, but certainly in my experience with Atari magazines, there was sort of a constant expectation that as well as using your computer for sort of pre-programmed software, be it productivity software or video games, there was an assumption that everyone who bought a computer was going to experiment with programming at some point. And the reason for that was that all of these home computers came with BASIC, which was an easy to learn programming language that you could pick up the principles of pretty quickly, but if you knew what you were doing and you knew some of the more advanced techniques, you could actually get some really interesting results out of it. And a lot of people then moved on to programming stuff in assembly language, which you could convert into raw machine code, which you could then publish in a magazine using systems like Analog's machine code loaders. And in that way, you could end up with high quality, high speed programs that performed just as well as commercial software. And indeed, there are a lot of people who relied on this software. They relied on public domain software that they either typed in from magazines or acquired from public domain libraries. And I guess the closest equivalent that we have these days is the open source movement, which is doing a similar sort of thing, but the way it's distributed is very different. So your average open source software these days, you tend not to have to type it in yourself. Sometimes you have to maybe compile it yourself. But the same benefit is there as these old type-in listings, in that you can look at the source code, you can pick it apart, and you can try and learn from it as well, which is quite nice. But yeah, it's a little bit different from what we had back then. Oh no! Come back! Come back! Oof. Yes, I do strongly believe that as part of the whole process of game preservation and game history and that sort of thing, that it is important to acknowledge that side of things as well. Because it's so easy to forget. It's so easy to focus on the big name commercial releases that everyone's heard of. And like we see it in certain other areas as well. Like if you look at what 2600 games get preserved these days. I mean, I'm not going to complain at the number of Atari Flashback Classics re-releases that there have been over the years by this point, but those are just Atari games. How many other 2600 games are now lost to time? Well, not lost to time, but no longer have a sort of legal commercial release for modern systems. Yes, you can emulate. Yes, you can probably track down the original cartridge from somewhere. But they're not preserved in quite the same way as those old Atari games are. And I guess it's the same for any platform. And I guess in the current modern age, we're going to really struggle to preserve a lot of things like mobile games, download-only games, and that sort of thing. Especially if they're exclusive to a particular storefront or only released on the author's own website or something like that. There's already games that were digital-only releases that you can't get anywhere anymore. And in that case, the only option really is to turn to piracy. Which raises interesting questions over whether or not it's really piracy if you're acquiring something that you just can't get via any other means. But that's a whole other discussion for another day. Anyway, Bacterion. This is a cool game, a pretty simple game, but it's one that's still pretty well regarded today. A lot of people like this game. Oh no. And it was a good example of the sort of quality of stuff that Analog would publish in its magazine. So, sort of technologically speaking, it might not look like much. So it's very simple. It's just using pretty straightforward graphics. It's not doing super fancy things with display list interrupts or anything like that. It's got a nice sort of shiny colour effect on the title screen, but it's got it where it counts in the gameplay. So it's a fun game to play, particularly in two-player mode. I mean, I don't have anyone to play this with right at this moment as I record this, unfortunately, but if you have the opportunity to play this with a friend, yeah, as you can see, it gets pretty frantic and competitive. as you continue through it. You'll come back. No! Oh dear, we're doing poorly now. Yeah, when I tried this earlier, I was a little bit concerned that it was going to be a bit easier and didn't really get that much harder. But yeah, it is getting noticeably more difficult now. And it's not entirely due to the speed either. I think they're shooting a bit more. And they're sort of being a bit more aggressive towards me as well. They're actually sort of specifically coming for me. Oh. So it means you have to fight a little bit more defensively. I get... No! Only 3 more left to go. Oh, God. I think it's all going to be over soon. Sweet relief of an interlude. Oh, God. Yeah, this is really getting tough now. I think the different types of bacteria might behave slightly differently as well, because the article that accompanied the type-in listing for the magazine made a big point of highlighting the fact that there were 6 different strains of bacteria that you were having to deal with. And yeah, I think they do have sort of slightly different behaviour patterns, which is just interesting. Oh God, we're gonna die. So yeah, I think this is sort of a pretty representative example of Analog's game output. So there were quite a lot of games from Analog that I would like to look at on this series at some point. Some of which I played back in the day, and some of which I never got around to, so I'm quite keen to actually look at those for the first time. But yeah, there's a lot of games that certainly I consider classics. I don't know if they're sort of widely considered to be classics, but there are a lot of games that I very fondly remember from my time with the Atari 8-bit that were all Analog games. So there's stuff like Buried Bucks is a good one. Livewire's another good one. That's a bit like Tempest. There's this one, obviously. There's Syntron, which I mentioned in the intro. Firebug. Yeah, all sorts of things. So there will almost certainly be more Analog games coming up in the near future on this. It's all over! Well, there we go. A score of 6,590 in the plague of 2369. And it all comes to a terrible end. Alright, anyway, so that was Bacterion from Analog Computing by Kyle Peacock with Tom Hudson, a machine code type-in listing from issue, what did I say, 20? In 1984. Yeah, good stuff. I enjoyed that, so hope you did too. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue the small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.